Justifying the Kalam of AHLUS-SUNNAH, the theological rhetoric of AHLUS-SUNNAH. Imam al-Ash'ari said that there are some who made ignorance their capital, means their main amount of money, their fundamental money. And it was burdensome for them to contemplate and research matters in the religion, like Wahhabis. You meet those ignorant Wahhabis, they don't really want to study or research or think even. If you tell them something that makes them think, you see their face twist because their clock wheels bust inside. They were inclined towards taking religious matters lightly and merely imitating people in their conviction, like the Wahhabis. Be careful. Their followers, the Wahhabis, their minions. Some people, including Wahhabis, what do? They do what makes their colleagues happy. They like to impress their colleagues. They like to impress their peers, their minions. They don't do things for the greater good. They do things to show their peers that they're down, that they're about it and with it. Whatever it is their issue. They defamed anyone who researched the matters of the essentials of belief and said that he is misguided. They claimed that talking about motion and stillness, bodies, qualities, like motion and stillness, colors, contact, separation, division, splitting, and the attributes of the Creator is innovation, heresy, and misguidance. Because to them, what should you do? To them, you should just open the Quran, read that translation, take it literally, ask them, don't ask anyone else. Read their books, don't read anything else. And don't think for yourself. Their essential argument for abandoning contemplating on the matters of the belief is as follows. They said, had this been guidance, the Prophet ﷺ would have spoken about it. And his guided caliphs who came after him and his companions would have spoken about it. They mean talking about the religious belief in detail like we do when we talk about the 13 attributes and we give the mental arguments for those attributes and we give the textual proofs for them. And we talk about how to debate with an opponent in these issues. They said the Prophet ﷺ, he never engaged in any of this, nor did his companions. They say the Prophet ﷺ did not die until he spoke about all needed religious matters and clarified them with lucidity. That means with clarity. Had it been goodness, they say, it would not have missed the Prophet ﷺ and his companions, and they would have spoken about it. They would have talked about these 13 attributes. They would have talked about motion and stillness and connection and disconnection and particles and separation, etc. They say, this must be for one of two reasons. The fact that they never spoke about this, they say, this must be for one of two reasons. Either they knew about it, but were silent about it, or they did not know about it, and instead they were ignorant about it, and that's why they were silent about it. If they knew about it and were silent about it, then it is enough also for us to be silent about it. And it would be sufficient for us to abandon delving into this issue as it was sufficient for them. Had it been from the religion, it would not be sufficient for them to be silent about it. And if it is the case that they did not know about it, then it is enough for us to be ignorant about it as they were ignorant about it. For had it been from the religion, they would not have been ignorant about it. So whichever way you want to look at it, talking about it is an innovation, is heresy, and delving into it is misguidance. That's what they say to us. We respond, one, if what is meant is that they did not have any rational arguments by which they knew about the self of Allah, his attributes, his oneness, his dissimilarity to the creation, the truthfulness of his messenger, and the validity of his miracles, but merely imitated him, this is far from the truth and is ugly talk. So we're saying to them, if you're claiming, if what you mean by this is that the Sahaba had no rational arguments, they just heard what Muhammad said and believed in him just out of imitating him with no proof, no rational proof. Meaning, so that when they talk to someone, if someone opposes them, they can respond. Because for a Wahhabi, for example, in our time, it's mostly Wahhabis who fight us in this. For a Wahhabi, for example, what's his case? He'll say, no, I got all the proof. The Quran is my proof. The Sunnah is my proof. So then when someone comes to talk to him with something rational, he say, I don't want to talk to you. I have nothing to say to you. I believe in the Quran and the Sunnah. He has no arguments. He has nothing rational. If someone were to say to him, well, just make sense to me. Close that book and make sense to me. He won't be able to. So they think the companions were like that. So we say to them, if you mean that the companions had no rational arguments about the self of Allah and the attributes of Allah and the prophethood of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the fact that he did miracles, then this is far from the truth and this is ugly talk. They indeed had rational arguments. There is no doubt that they used mental evidence, rational arguments. They were not originally following the Prophet's religion so that they would merely imitate him, nor was he a king with dominion over them so that he could force them to follow him. And furthermore, their own families and communities fought them to make them leave their religion. Had it not been that they confirmed the veracity of what the Prophet said, of what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was saying by evidence, how did they stay firm? In the face of all of that, in the first place, they didn't already have his religion. They had a religion and it wasn't his religion. So if they had no evidence, why would they convert to his religion? And then even if they did, because people do convert to invalid religions, their families were fighting them. Their communities were fighting them. You know the stories. Sometimes they killed them. Sumayya, she was the first martyr in Islam. May Allah raise her rank in the nation of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a sister. She refused to commit kufr. What made them like that? Just nothing, no proof, nothing rational. They weren't following his religion. He wasn't their king so that he could force them. Had it not been that they confirmed the veracity of what the Prophet was saying by evidence, they confirmed it by evidence. How did they stay firm? Two, additionally, Allah dispraised those who imitated their ancestors in worshiping the idols. He told us that they said, Inna wajadna aba'ana ala ummah wa inna ala atharihim muhtadun. We certainly have found our fathers on a religion, and we certainly are followers in their legacy. That's what they said. Their only answer to their prophets for why they have their religion was that it was the religion of their ancestors. Allah dispraised them for that. Allah Ta'ala made that reason invalid. It is understood from this that knowing evidence is necessary. So, how were the companions avoiding this with this ayah? Dispraises, which is having a religion without evidence. 3, and if what is meant is that the companions did not use the mustalah, the terms or the jargon of the people of the science, yani the Muslim scholars, especially the Muslim scholars who came later, if their argument to us is that this way you talk, the companions and the Prophet ﷺ, they didn't talk like that. So if they mean, well, they didn't talk with the jargon of the scholars who came later, the jargon of the people of this science, we're talking about the creed here. If their argument is that these words that you use to talk about the belief, the Prophet and his companions didn't use those words, such as Jawhar, smallest indivisible particle, Arab, a quality or a characteristic of a creation, Jaiz, possible, Muhal, impossible, Hadath, occurrence or event, meaning something created, and Qidam, eternity. So these are words that we use frequently when we talk about belief. So if what they mean is that the companions did not used to use these words, then this is true and undisputed. They did not used to use these words. However, we counter that with its likes in all the other types of knowledge. Knowledge that you yourselves use, we say to our opponent. That one who's saying, well, the way you talk about belief, these words you use, the Prophet and his companions didn't used to use those words, so you cannot talk about this. We say to them, but what about all the other sciences also? It is not narrated that the Prophet ﷺ and his companions used the terms qiyas, the legal comparison, or mu'aradah, conflict, or shart, condition, or illah, the reason, the way that the scholars of fiqh use it, or that they used jarh, defamation, and ta'dil, accreditation, and ahad, the report of an individual, mashhur, the report of at least 3, and sahih, authentic hadith, and da'if, etc. So, is it valid for someone to say that it is necessary to reject these sciences, these disciplines, because the Prophet and his companions did not use their terms? So if you say yes, then it means, we say to them, if you say yes, then it means you have nullified every Islamic science just because the Prophet and the companions didn't use those terms. And if you say no, we can still use these sciences despite that the Prophet and his companions didn't use those terms, then why can't we do that for the science of belief also? It's the same thing. So why do they even have then, brothers and sisters, why do the scholars have terms that the Prophet and his companions didn't use? Because the scholars who came later, they elaborated and also they systematized the information. They elaborated, so they needed words, and they systematized the information. So they came out using words that the Prophet and his companions weren't using. And usually, in whatever field this is we're talking about, usually their words would be different until after time passes and then their words become more uniform. Like, for example, in the science of hadith, they had the hadith since the time of the Prophet ﷺ. The companions were narrating hadiths. Aisha was a muhadditha. Ibn Abbas was a muhaddith. Abu Hurairah was a muhaddith. These hadith scholars from the time of the Prophet ﷺ, they were hadith scholars. And they passed the hadiths on to those who came after them. And the companions were narrating by isnad, and the tabi'un were narrating by isnad. Even still, though, when they started to elaborate more on these hadith issues, they started using words. So maybe a Shafi'i, he would say the words that he would say, and another scholar, he would say the words that he would say. For example, if you look at some of the words of a Shafi'i, he might call a hadith a Hasan hadith. Say this hadith is Hasan, but really it's a Sahih hadith. Why would a Shafi'i call it a Hasan hadith if it's a Sahih hadith? Because the terminology didn't become uniform yet at that time. So the science was still young, in other words. After some time passed and the scholars got to know each other's terms, they became uniform in that. They started saying it the same way. So that's how it goes in the different fields. So, and that's why there are terms that the scholars used that the Prophet and his companions didn't use. That doesn't nullify or debunk those disciplines. For additionally, one must consider that the deviant ideas did not appear at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As Abu al-Mudhaffar said in At-Tafsir, I'll just read the English here. He said, know that the Muslims during the time of the Prophet and for some time after his death were on one path. There was no apparent difference among them, and those opposing hypocrites, the hypocrites who were in opposition to the Prophet and his companions, and those opposing hypocrites among them, those hypocrites who were opposing them and living among them, were unable to show what they had been keeping secret. They were unable to show what they had been keeping secret. Meaning, what's the point here? The point here is this is another reason why they didn't use some words that we use, because they were not engaging in dialogue with many deviant people, with people of all sorts of weird ideas, like the Muslims who came after them, and like in our time now, people with many, many strange ideas. Thus, there was no need to delve into these terms. Someone once said to Abu Hanifa, why do you talk with the knowledge of Kalam and the companions did not talk with it? He said, their example, their case is like people who do not have in their presence those who fight them. So they did not need to wield their weapons. And our example or our case is like those who have among them in their presence those who fight them. So they had to wield their weapons. So it means they had the weapons like we have the weapons, but they didn't have to draw. They didn't have to draw their weapons because they were not engaged with all those different types of people. But we do have to draw our weapons so that we can refute the people who deny the existence of God, the people who believe that if you commit a sin, you're a blasphemer, the people who say that God has a body, the people who say they make their own destiny, the people who say if you commit a major sin, then you're not a believer or a kafir, etc., etc. All sorts of ideas that came out afterwards. They had to elaborate, they had to bring terms so that they could engage those people. All verses that we have or have not mentioned are the basis and evidence for us talking about what we have mentioned with details, even if not every case was specified in the book and the sunnah. This means even though the words that we use in this science, maybe the Prophet and his companions didn't use them, but They are taken, though, the meanings are taken from the ayahs of the Quran. Ayahs that we have produced or not yet produced. So all verses that we have or have not mentioned are the basis and evidence, meaning the general reference, for us talking about what we have mentioned with details. So there would be something in the Quran, and from it we would extract, deduce, and conclude that there are indivisible particles, for example. Because what took place specifically among the intellectual cases during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the companions, they spoke about it the way we have mentioned. Yani, actually, it's not true that they didn't talk like we're talking. Really, it's not really true. It's not accurate to say they didn't. It's just they didn't go as extensively. But they did, and they had the same method, the same way of talking to uh, kafir or deviant, just like the Muslims do today. How we have mental arguments, if we talk to a Christian, don't we say, well, if you say this, that means this? It's just giving him a simple mental proof. They did the same exact thing. Exactly, not any different. Those Sahaba really were like us in that regard, or we were like them in that regard. Yes, their knowledge was far beyond our knowledge. Their comprehension of things was far beyond ours in terms of religion. But their method of talking about the belief is the same method. When Sulaim said to the kafir at the time who wanted to marry her, she said, don't you know that you worship a piece of wood that was chiseled by the slave of such and such clan? He said, yes. She said, aren't you ashamed to worship an idol, a piece of wood that was chiseled by the slave of such and such clan? And then he didn't know what to say. So we do the same thing, just that easy. If it were said as an argument against the Sunni Kalam, the Kalam meaning the theological rhetoric and the mental arguments that we produce, if it were said, Al-Bayhaqi narrated from Ibn Abbas with a sahih chain that he said, think about everything and do not think about the self of Allah. So why would someone say that? Why would someone produce this statement of Ibn Abbas? Because he doesn't even really understand what Ibn Abbas is saying. If someone would produce this statement of Ibn Abbas to discourage us from how we talk about the belief, that's because he thinks Ibn Abbas is saying, just read the Quran and take it literally. Don't think about Allah. Don't think about what that means. Don't think about what hands and feet and face and eyes mean. Just believe it. That's what they think Ibn Abbas is saying here. Think about everything and do not think about the self of Allah. We respond, Ibn Abbas's prohibition here is about thinking about the reality of the Creator. And his command is to think about the creation. So when he said, think about everything, that's a command. So his command is to think about the creation. And when he said, do not think about the self of Allah, that's a prohibition. He's forbidding us. So what he forbade is thinking about the self of Allah. And what he commanded is to think about the creations. That's what we do. That necessitates contemplation about the earth and the skies. That's all the creation we see around us. So to arrive at confirming the Creator's existence and that he does not resemble his creation, yani we look at what's around us, we say, hey, look, this is changing. That means there must be a Creator. How would someone who does not know the difference between the Creator and the creation apply this narration of Ibn Abbas? It's only the ignoramus who thinks that this statement of Ibn Abbas deters us from what we do. Ibn Abbas did what we do. This statement falls in line with everything we do in our presentation of the Muslim creed. وَسُبْحَانَ اللَّهِ وَبِحَمْدِهِ